Alright, so in this video we're getting out of the book again because the book doesn't go quite deep enough to what we need to do. Not only do we need to understand inequalities, what they're telling us, how to put them on a line, I have to be able to do some algebra with them also. So things I have to remember. I have to remember how to solve for an inequality, what that symbol's telling me. I have to remember how to do algebra, and I have to remember how to do my inverse property. And so that reminds us to do the opposite function on the opposite side. But I'm also going to be dealing with my integers. So at this time you need to make sure that you have your integer papers. What integer papers? Well, we did integers, and that was outside the book, because I told you we were going to use them when we got into inequalities. And I told you to put them in your folder. So it's the ones that we practiced on with the videos, and I taught you how to add integers and the questions to ask. Taught you how to subtract integers and the questions to ask. And then the multiplication and division of integers and the questions to ask. And I worked through several practice problems. And I asked you to keep them and have them in your folder. Because I found several of them around the class. I kept trying to give them back to you, and then you ended up throwing them away. I wasn't going to fight with you anymore. So I'm hoping that you're just one of those really strong math students that you'll never have to have another paper again to look at. But hopefully most of you actually kept them. You can look at them at any time as you're going through this. I'll review it on the video, but I don't have any extra sheets to give you. As I'm working through this, then I have to remember that I'm doing algebra, and then that means I have a variable or a letter. That variable has to be taken and gotten by itself. So once I can get that by itself, I have to figure out how I can get it by itself. And that's where I'm doing my inverse property. My inverse property says to start where the variable is and whatever math is being done. It's either going to be adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. Then I'm going to do that opposite function. So if I'm adding to my variable, I'm going to subtract. If I'm subtracting to my variable, then I'm going to add. If I'm multiplying with my variable, I'm going to divide. And if I'm dividing with my variable, then I'm going to multiply. I do the opposite function. Once I do that, that is going to give me my variable by itself. Then I have to do it on the opposite side. Once I solve for it, I know what A is equal to, or X is equal to, or Q is equal to. Then I have to look at my symbols and remember what I'm doing when it comes to graphing them. So once again, if it's a greater than or less than sign by itself, then I know it's an open circle because it tells me that it cannot include that number. If it's pointing to the variable, then that means the variable is the smallest number, and therefore my shaded in area portion of my line is going to go to the left. Now, if I solve for it and the symbol has a line underneath it that says it's either greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, that's when I fill in my circle. So I have a complete circle because it could include that number. And then if it's pointing to it, then I know it's the smallest number and it's going to go to the left. If the arrows are pointing away from my variable, then that means my variable is larger than that other number. So that's when I shade in my line to the right. I'm going to work through 8 problems, and these 8 problems are going to be similar to what you're going to do on your homework. There is one new thing. So everything I just mentioned are things that I've taught you on multiple occasions, reviewed with you, gone over in videos. You have access still to those videos at any time that you want to. You can go back and watch them. There's one new thing that's going to be added to graphing integers when there's algebra involved. I'll bring that up when we get to it. There are a couple of them on your homework assignments, so I'm hoping you're following along, paying attention. These look difficult, but I promise you, if you just do the basic math steps that I've taught you, and I'm getting ready to review with you, it's not difficult. And there are some of you that you're with me on every video, and you're practicing, and you're taking your notes, and you go back and look at your notes, and you're doing a great job. The ones that are struggling are the ones that you try to watch me and fast forward, you're not following along, you're not taking notes, and then when you go to do your homework, you don't get it. I promise this will work for you if you simply do as I ask you to do. This is not my concept to teach from a video. It's called a flipped classroom. It's happening all over the country, and students all over the country are being successful because they're watching these videos, but a lot of times they're sitting at home And the homework is that you watch the video that night before you come to class. And then when you come to class, you're doing the work with the teacher there to help you. I'm just, here's the video, watch it, do the work. I'm in the classroom with you to help you at any time. You can be successful and you will be successful. And there are several of you that you've just done a fantastic job and you're becoming really strong math students. And that has been my ultimate goal all along, for you to be successful. So here we go. We're going to go through these. I have 8 different ones. The first 4 are dealing with addition and subtraction. The second 4 are going to deal with multiplication and division. And that's where that new step is going to come into play. So please show every step that I show, so that you're going to see it's the same pattern and it's the same process over and over and over again. That will lead to your success. If you don't see this as your first problem, flip your paper over. You're on the wrong side. So this says, if I read it, the d plus 2 is greater than or equal to. I know it says greater than or equal to because my arrow points away from it. The arrow points to the smallest number. So it's saying greater than 18. So my first step that I'm going to do, and this is where some of you start off getting some mistakes because you're not willing to do it. It only takes a half a second to copy this problem down for me to work with. I can't fit all of my work in this little itty bitty space. So please stop trying. I'm going to write it down. Now if you don't feel like there's enough space underneath the problem that I gave you, because they're only put 4 on each side, then there's the margins at the sides that I left for any extra space or work that you need to do. You need to write the problem down. This is how we're going to show our work to get our first point. Then I'm going to start with my inverse. So once again, opposite function on the opposite side, and I start where my variable is. My variable can be on the left or my variable can be on the right. It doesn't matter. I still start where the letter is, and I do the opposite of what's happening to it. I'm adding 2 to D. So I'm going to do the opposite. The opposite is subtracting 2 from D. So what that does is that's going to give me my D by itself. So I'm going to rewrite it a second time, and I'm going to keep the symbol pointing in the same direction. So everything that I have left over will end up being my integer, or my inequality, that I'm then going to graph. So I know that I have positive 2 and negative 2, positive 2, and I have a negative 2 added to it, which gives me 0. So my identity property tells me to just keep the D. So that cancels those 2 out. That's my goal, to get this canceled out so D is by itself, so I know that I now have D is greater than or equal to something. Then I do it on the opposite side. So I did my opposite function, I go to my opposite side, and now I have here subtracting 2, over here I'm going to subtract 2. 18 minus 2, that is second grade work of subtraction. 18 minus 2 is 16. Easy peasy, shouldn't be a problem at all. Now I have to decide where my point's going to go. I look at it, it says 16. On my number line I have a 16, and then I look at my symbol. It's underlined, right? So if it's underlined, this could be 16. So I have to fill it in. Then I have to decide which way I'm going to shape my line. Now, I've said all along, it's about where the arrow points. And there were 2 of you that I found out that you really just weren't sure what I even meant by the arrow. So I'm going to look at that. Let's look at what these are. So these symbols is what I refer to as the arrow. When I say it points to, you're looking at that backwards from what I am intending for you to understand. So when I say points to, it's the tip of the arrow that points to the smallest number. The tip of the arrow points to the smallest number. So when I see this one, the tip of the arrow, 16 has to be the smallest number. So that tells me that anything that D is going to be equal to has to be greater than 16. 16 is the smallest number. Everything else then has to be shaded. So I know I'm going to fill in my line to the right. So make sure you have all that written down step by step, because we're going to go on. If you need to pause the video after each of the problems, please do, but keep up and show your steps so your homework is really easy. My second one, 8, arrows pointing to the 8, so I know 8 is less than, and here I have my R on this side, does not change my math at all. Doesn't matter what side my variable is on. R minus 6. So I start by writing the problem down to where I can work with it. Then, my first step, my inverse property, I'm going to look at what I'm doing to the R. To the R, I am subtracting 6. So I'm going to do my opposite function. Now, when you get your assignment, you're going to see at the bottom on both sides, it says opposite function, then opposite side. It's a hint that I'm giving you, so hopefully you'll do well and look back at it while you're doing it. So I have a minus 6, I'm going to add 6. That's the opposite function. My goal is, once again, to cancel it out and get R by itself. So I know I'm going to have to keep my symbol, and then once they're canceled out, I know that that allows me to have R down here by itself. So my symbol's staying the same, and my R is still greater than something. I did my opposite function, now I do it on the opposite side. So I have to come over here and add 6. And when I add 8 and 6, mathematically, first grade math, I get 14. So here it says, 14 is less than, because the arrow is pointing to the 14. Well, 14 has to be my number. There's not a line underneath it, so I circle, I put a circle, open circle, where the 14 is. I don't fill it in, because it cannot be equal to. And then I have to decide, well, it's pointing to the smallest number. So therefore, R has to be greater than. And therefore, everything larger than 14 is going to be shaded in. So I'm going to shade to the right. On my third one, P minus 6 is less than or equal to, because the arrow points to this side, negative 8. So I have integers. I have to remember how to do my integers. I hope you got your papers out. I'm going to start by writing my problem where I can do the work. I'm going to start with my first step. I find my variable. I look at the work being done to my variable. I'm subtracting 6. So subtracting 6, the opposite of that, my opposite function is going to be to add 6. By adding 6, then I know I'm trying to get my variable by itself, so I go ahead and copy down my symbol. Once I copy down my symbol, I know this cancels it out, which gives me P by itself. So I did my opposite function, got my variable by itself. I'm going to go to the opposite side. Over here I added 6, so over here I'm going to add 6. When I add 6 to a negative 8, so I get out my handy dandy papers, I begin to look at my steps. Can I add integers? Yes. Do I have the same sign? No. Keep the sign of the largest number. Well, 8 is larger than 6, so I know I'm going to keep the negative in my answer. Whatever my answer is, it's going to be negative. Opposite signs then tell me to subtract the integers. So I'm going to take 8 minus 6, which gives me 2. I kept my symbol of negative, so I know my answer is negative 2. So this tells me that P is less than or equal to negative 2. All right. Now, one of the quick checks is, when I get my answer to my integer, or my inequality, I should check to see if my answer is even on the number line. If it's not, then most likely it's you that made the mistake and not the computer program that I used to create the worksheets. So if you don't see a negative 2 on this number line, then you probably did your math wrong. It's just a quick check. Mine is up there. I know I did my math correctly. So I'm going to see what I'm going to put. Am I going to put an open circle or a complete circle? Well, my greater than less than sign is underlined. It says P is less than or equal to, so I know I have to include negative 2. So it's going to be a solid circle. I know it's a solid circle that I put in my line, and that P is smaller because the arrow points to it. So that means anything else smaller is what P can be equal to. So if that's true, then I know I'm going to shade to the left because P is smallest. All right, your fourth one. This is where I want you to do your work. I worked through 3 of them. None of this is new math. We've already done opposite function, opposite side to solve for variables. I am not doing anything different with my symbol. I know how to do integers, positive, negatives. So I want you to do this question. I don't know if I have an integer question or not. Pause the video. Come back to me when you have your work. So hopefully you have your answer. And your answer looks like this. So let's see why my answer looks this way and see if you made a mistake, or maybe I did, because I often do. So I had 1 plus g is less than or equal to 14. I copied it down correctly. I'm going to get my g by itself. Positive 1 plusing 1, so I have to subtract 1. When I had that, I canceled it out, which gave me g is less than or equal to, so I'm subtracting 1 over here. Opposite function, opposite side, I subtract 1 over here. 14 minus 1, first grade math, we're okay with that, equals 13. So I look at my symbol, it is a less than or equal to, because it's pointing to the g. If it's equal to, I put a solid circle, and since it's pointing to g, g has to be smallest, so anything less than 13 could also be part of it. So that is graphed correctly, so hopefully yours is as well, and you're ready to go on, and we're going to look at multiplication and division. So flip your paper over. Now you should see this at the top of your paper. I have 5k is greater than or equal to, because it's pointing away from them, 30. I start same way I do with the addition and subtraction. I'm going to write the problem down where I can work with it. 5k greater than or equal to 30. So what math is being done to my variable? Because I always start the same way. I have to get my variable by itself. Well, a letter touching a number, so a coefficient and a variable, means multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is what? Division. So I do my opposite function. I'm going to divide here, and I know I'm getting my k by itself, so I drop my symbol. So I divide by 5 instead of multiplying by 5. That's going to cancel that out. That's going to allow me to keep my k by itself. That's what I have to do. So then if I divide it here by k or 5, then I have to do it on the opposite side. So I'm going to divide over there by 5. That's going to give me 30 divided by 5. That's basic third grade math. Division. 30 divided by 5. Top number goes inside the box. Bottom number is my divisor on the outside. So dividend, numerator, divisor, denominator. Should have touched my board. When I divide 30 by 5, I get 6. So I know that k is greater than or equal to 6. That is my answer to my inequality, but now I have to graph it. All right, so when I look at it, I'm talking about a 6. So am I going to put a circle, or am I going to put a complete dot, filled in circle? Well, it gives me my equal sign underneath it, right? It says it's greater than or equal to. So I go to my 6, and I'm going to put a complete solid circle. Then I have to figure out what side of that circle is going to be shaded from 6. Well, the arrow points to the smallest number. 6 is the smallest that I can go. Since it's pointing away from the k, then I know I'm going to shade everything to the right. If 6 is smallest, I can't go this way. I have to go forward. So the rest of my line should be shaded. Once again, as I'm moving forward, if I'm going too fast, please pause the video and keep up with your own paper and move at your pace. Alright, so now I'm going to have negative 7 is greater than g divided by 2. Alright, well if I have negative 7 is greater than g divided by 2, notice I wrote it so I can do work in that work area. I look at my variable is g. What am I doing to it mathematically? Well, I'm dividing by 2. I know I'm dividing by 2 because a fraction is always division. I have a couple of you that aren't remembering that, so you got to get that in your head. If I say, well, I'm dividing by 2, then what's my first step? Opposite function, right? So I have to do my opposite function. And doing my opposite function is getting the g by itself. So I know that symbol needs to drop down so I can get g, so I can create my inequality. My opposite function of division, opposite division, is multiplication. So if I'm dividing by 2, I have to multiply by 2. And what's that do? Cancels that out, right? So if that's canceled out, I have g by itself, I'm good to go because that's my first goal, get my variable by itself. Now I do opposite side. So multiplied by 2, over here I'm going to multiply it by 2. But that's an integer. So if you don't remember how to multiply with integers, then you go to the paper that I asked you to get out and keep that's in your math folder. So then I look at it and I have multiplication of integers. Can I multiply integers? I see yes. Do I have the same sign? No. So my answer is automatically negative. And then I just do the math. So I keep my negative because they're opposites, and I just do the math. 2 times 7, third grade multiplication, that's 14. I'm good to go. Now I can graph it. I know that negative 14 is up there on my line, so that's a good logical answer. I know that it has to be greater than whatever g is equal to, so it's not underlined, right? So I put a circle instead of a complete dot. So I know that that's correct. All right, so g is less than is my arrow points to it. So negative 14 is the largest that I can go. Once again, when that comes to negative numbers, the closer to 0 I get, the greater the value. So the further away from 0 that I get, the smaller the value. And that's what we're talking about, that g is the smallest one. So I know that I'm going to shape everything to the left. Your third one. Negative 5 multiplied by v is less than 65. So this looks a little different, right? Because I've got a negative over here now that I have to carry over. So this is the new thing that we're going to talk about once we start solving for it. So the first thing I do is I do the math. I write down the math, and then I begin with my opposite function. I'm multiplying by negative 5, so I'm going to divide by negative 5. Now that's not the new math. Can I divide integers? Yes. Do I have the same sign? I do. So I know it's going to be positive, and it's just going to be 1 because it's 5 divided by 5. So that's not new. I know how to do that. That's going to give me my v by itself. That cancels it out, leaves v, but this is what's different. When I go to do my opposite side then, I have to realize that I'm carrying over a negative 5 that I'm either multiplying or dividing with. Now, this is the new step. This is something new that you need to understand the concept of, because some of these are going to be on your homework. Not most of them. There's only a couple of them. So it really needs to register what we're doing here. So I hope that you're not watching them fast forward and that you're not staring off into space, that you're actually paying attention to what I'm teaching you, because this is something new. When in an inequality, I'm going to divide or multiply on the opposite side by a negative, that causes a change. The change, when I divide or multiply that sign, that opposite side, it tells me to flip, to change my comparison sign. It's the only time I do. Here I divided by negative 5, so on the other side I had to divide by negative 5. If I was multiplying by a negative 5, and over here then multiplying by a negative 5, it's the same thing. Multiplication and division by a negative on the opposite side tells me I have to flip my sign. So notice then, as I'm going to write where my answer is, it's the opposite of what it started out as, because I'm dividing by a negative 5. It's not difficult. I'm just telling you and reminding you that if my opposite side function, if I'm doing multiplication or division with a negative, just flip the sign, because then I can do it correctly. Once I do that, then I look at what I have. So I have a negative 5, and I have a 65, and I have division, but that's integers, right? Well, on your paper, you got it out, right? So we look at our division of integers question. Can I divide integers? Yes. Do I have the same sign? No. Not the same sign means it's going to be a negative answer. Then I just do the math. So 5 goes into 65 13 times. So 5, I keep it as a negative because this one's negative and that one's positive. And then when I divide, I have 13. So I know v is greater than negative 13. It's not less than, because I had to, on my opposite side, do a multiplication or division with a negative. That does change one thing. That's the new thing in this lesson. So then, the next step is not the new thing. I graph it. So I know that I'm talking about negative 13. Is that on my answer line? It is. So I know that I'm going to put 13, and it's not equal to, so I'm going to circle it. Then I decide which way I'm going to shade it. I look at where my v is. It's being pointed away from. Negative 13 is going to be my smallest because the arrow points to it. So I know that v has to be anything greater than negative 13. So everything to the right is going to be shaded. Not difficult, as long as I pay attention and figure out what I'm talking about. So if you didn't listen truly engage your brain and ears together, please rewind this question and listen to what I'm talking about when it comes to flipping the sign. Because once again, you'll have it on your homework. I think there's two, actually there might be three of them that you're going to have to flip your sign on. So that takes you to the last one on this side that I want you to do on your own. Follow the steps, write it down, show your work, and then unpause your video once you're done and check your work. So hopefully you've done as I asked and you've practiced this. And you'll look at what you did. So here we go. This is the answer that I got. Does yours look the same way? Did you get that k is less than negative 20? Did you circle where the 20 is? That's open. And did you point to the left? So if not, let's look at why I did. Maybe I made a mistake, or maybe you did. So I started by writing my math problem down. D divided by 2, because once again a fraction is always division. D divided by 2 is less than, because it's pointing to it, is less than. Negative 10. Negative 10. All right, I copied it correctly. That has happened to me. I've copied them down incorrectly, so that's got to be my first step. I find my variable. My variable is the D. What am I mathematically doing to the D? Well, it's in a fraction form, so I know it's division. So I have to start with opposite function. The opposite of dividing by 2, multiplying by 2. Cancels it out. So if I multiply by 2 here, then I do it on the opposite side. So negative 10 times 2. Multiplying integers, you looked at your paper, you asked the questions. Can I multiply integers? I can. Do I have the same sign? No. Opposite signs tell me it's a negative answer. Then I do the math. 10 times 2, multiplication third grade, gives me 20. So I had k is less than negative 20. I found negative 20 on the line. I looked back here. It's not underlined, so I know it's an open circle. I put an open circle where the negative 20 was. And then I looked at what this is saying. It's pointing to k, so I know k is the smallest. K is the smallest. And therefore, everything to the left of the negative 20 is shaded in. So that's the lesson. The only new thing is that when I multiply or divide for the opposite side with a negative, then I flip my sign from to that, right? Okay. Everything else is not new. We know what algebra is. We know how to find the inverse by doing the opposite function on the opposite side. We know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide integers. Everything else is pretty good to go. It's just graphing that inequality once I find the answer. So if there's confusion, the best thing you can do is rewind the video and focus on paying attention. And then you'll get it. If you're paying attention and following along, I've got faith that most of you are going to get your assignment, do the 20 questions, and get an A on it. If you have any questions, then please come and ask.